Think back to January 2nd, 1974. President Nixon picked up a pen and signed a piece of paper that turned 100 million law-abiding Americans into criminals overnight. It was the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act, but you knew it by a different name: the double nickel, the 55-mile-per-hour national speed limit. The stroke of that pen didn't just change a traffic law, it declared war on the American driver. For the last 20 years, you had been promised a future of speed. The interstate highway system was built to be the Autobahn of the West: wide, smooth, and fast. It was designed for 75, 80, even 90 miles per hour. Detroit was building 400 horsepower monsters: the Pontiac GTO, the Dodge Charger, the Mustang Mach-1. These weren't cars designed to put along at the speed of a farm tractor. They were built to eat pavement. And then, suddenly, the brakes were hammered. The government told you it was to save gas. The OPEC oil embargo had turned every gas station into a waiting room, and Uncle Sam said we all had to sacrifice. But when you were driving across the empty plains of Nebraska or the straight arrow highways of Nevada, where you can see for 50 miles in every direction, doing 55 didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like a punishment. It felt like walking a greyhound on a 3-foot leash. But here is where the story gets interesting, because America didn't just roll over and tap the brakes. We rebelled, and we didn't rebel with protest signs or sit-ins. We rebelled with technology, with code words, and with the heavy right foot of a Chevy Nova. This is the story of the 21-year game of cat and mouse between the American driver and the bear in the air. This is the story of how a bad law created an entire culture of outlaws. To understand how much this hurt, you have to remember the machines we were driving. In 1974, the average family car was a behemoth. A Chevrolet Caprice Classic weighed 4,000 pounds and had a 400 cubic inch V8. That engine wasn't even barely awake at 55 miles per hour. It was lugging. It wanted to run. Forcing these machines to drive 55 was like forcing a racehorse to walk in a parade. It ruined the engines. It fouled the plugs with carbon buildup. But mostly, it killed the soul of the drive. The automotive industry panicked. If you can't drive fast, why buy a fast car? This law birthed the darkest era in American automotive history, the malaise era. Since speed was illegal, Detroit stopped trying. The Ford Mustang, once a symbol of freedom, became the Mustang II, a glorified Pinto that struggled to get out of its own way. The Corvette, America's sports car, was choked down to 165 horsepower. They tried to fool us with tape stripe horsepower. They put screaming chicken decals on hoods and racing stripes on doors. But under the hood, the engines were strangled by emissions pumps and catalytic converters. It was a tragedy of metal and rubber. But while Detroit surrendered, the drivers fought back. Truckers were the first generals in this war. For them, time was literally money. If they drove 55 from New York to Los Angeles, they lost days of their lives and hundreds of dollars from their paychecks. The government tried to enforce the limit by putting tattletale lights on speedometers and harassing fleets. So the truckers stopped talking on the radio stations the government could regulate, and they moved to the citizens' band, the CB radio. Suddenly, a piece of obscure hobbyist electronics became the most important tool in America. It was the Waze app of the 1970s, but analog, gritty, and alive. You didn't just listen, you participated. You learned the language. It was a code designed to be spoken in the open, but understood only by the Brotherhood. A police officer wasn't an officer. He was a Smokey, named after the hat. A state trooper was a Mountie. A local cop was a city kitty. If the road was clear, it was clean and green. If there was a speed trap ahead, you warned the guy behind you. Breaker 19, you got a Smokey taking pictures at mile marker 42. Taking pictures meant using radar. Feeding the bears meant getting a ticket. It created a brotherhood. You weren't just a guy in a Ford Galaxy anymore. You were part of an underground resistance network. You were the bandit, running interference for the snowman. Hollywood saw this bubbling anger and poured gasoline on the fire. Smokey and the Bandit wasn't just a movie in 1977. It was a documentary of the American mood. When Burt Reynolds jumped that Trans Am over the bridge, he wasn't just escaping a sheriff. He was escaping the gray, boring, regulated world that Washington was trying to build. We cheered because he was doing what we all wanted to do: drop the hammer, burn the tires, and leave the rules in the rearview mirror. But the ultimate expression of this rebellion was the Cannonball Run, the real one. Not the movie with the stars, but the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash. It was organized by Brock Yates of Car and Driver magazine as a strictly illegal protest against the 55 miles per hour limit. The rules were simple: New York to Los Angeles. No route, no speed limit. First one there wins. It proved a point. Drivers in Ferraris, vans, and sedans crossed the country at average speeds of 80, 90, 100 miles per hour, and they did it without crashing. They proved that speed didn't kill. Bad driving killed. Competence mattered more than a number on a sign. It was a slap in the face to the safety crusaders in Washington. The government didn't back down. They doubled down. They threatened to withhold highway funds from any state that didn't enforce the limit. So states like Montana and Nevada, where driving 55 was practically dangerous because you'd fall asleep from boredom, had to comply. Or did they? In some western states, the troopers hated the law as much as you did. There were legends of energy-wasting tickets. These were non-moving violations. If you got caught doing 80 in a 55 zone in Nevada, sometimes the cop wouldn't give you a speeding ticket that went on your insurance. He'd give you a $5 fine for wasting resources. You paid the $5 on the spot, and you kept driving 80. It was a wink and a nod. It was the West saying, we have to follow the rules to get the federal money, but we don't have to like them. For the rest of us, we had to get tactical. This started the radar war. The radar detector moved from the shelves of spy shops to the dashboards of minivans. The Fuzzbuster, the Escort, the Whistler. These little black boxes were our early warning systems. It was an arms race. The police would get X-band radar. We would get X-band detectors. The police would switch to K-band. We would upgrade our detectors. They would get instant-on radar that didn't broadcast a signal until they pulled the trigger. We got detectors that could sniff out a scatter signal from a mile away. When that light beeped, you slammed on the brakes. The nose of the car dipped. You checked your speed. You looked for the cruiser in the median. When the beeping stopped, you sped up. It was a constant, high-stakes game played at 75 miles per hour. And the stats? They were a mess. The government claimed the law saved lives. And sure, fatalities dropped in 1974, but they also dropped because people were driving less because gas was expensive. As the years went on and cars got safer, the speed limit stayed at 55. Germany had the Autobahn with no speed limits and had fewer accidents per mile than we did. It became clear that safety was just the excuse. It was about control. By the 1980s, the law had become a joke. Compliance rates were laughable. On I-95 or I-80, the flow of traffic was routinely 70 or 75. If you actually drove 55, you were the hazard. You were the rock in the stream that everyone had to swerve around. You were the one causing the accidents. Sammy Hagar wrote the anthem for the generation, I Can't Drive 55. He wasn't singing about being a reckless teenager. He was inspired by a real ticket he got driving a rental car in upstate New York. He was doing 62 in a 55. A cop pulled him over. Hagar was furious. He screamed, I can't drive 55. He grabbed a pen and wrote the lyrics on the spot. It resonated because it was true. The law didn't fit the reality. It wasn't until 1987 that they finally let us go to 65 on rural interstates. And it wasn't until 1995, 21 years later, that Congress finally repealed the NMSL completely. Do you remember that day? The day the signs changed. In Montana, they put up signs that just said reasonable and prudent. No number. Just use your brain. It felt like adulthood. It felt like the government was finally treating us like grown-ups who could be trusted to steer our own destiny. But for those 21 years, from 1974 to 1995, we lived in a different country, a slower country, a country where every trip took 20% longer, and every rearview mirror check came with a little spike of adrenaline. It killed the muscle car era. Who wants a Hemi Cuda if you can never open the throttle? It gave us the malaise era, filled with choked-down engines and cars that looked fast but drove slow. But it also gave us something else. It gave us a shared enemy. It gave us the CB radio. It gave us the radar detector. It gave us a reason to flash our headlights at a stranger, to warn them about a cop ahead. It united us in a quiet, rolling conspiracy. Today, you can set your cruise control to 80 in Texas, and the cops won't even look at you. We take that speed for granted, but the guys who drove through the 70s and 80s know better. We know what it's like to have a big block V8 and a heavy foot, and to be told by a sign on the side of the road that the fun is over. The 55-mile-per-hour speed limit didn't save gas. It didn't save the world, but it sure as hell taught us how to spot a Ford Crown Victoria from a mile away. And maybe, just maybe, it taught us that some rules are meant to be bent, specifically in the left lane, with the hammer down and the radio on.